You are joining the AI in College Admission NACAC Special Interest Group. We are really excited to bring to you a really special session today. This is a recap of a session that took place at NACAC 2025, just this last September. My name is Emily Pacheco. I am one of the leaders of the AI in college admission group. You also can find us at edhub.ai. And today we've got three guests with us that presented this session live to a full, huge audience there at the conference. But we wanted to bring this to an audience that might not have been able to attend the conference, might not have had the time, the energy, the resources to do that. And we're bringing this to you free. And so we're really excited that we can, provide this. We're also going to record it. It is recorded. It will be up on our YouTube channel after, so we hope that you'll share it with your audience as well. So I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves today. There is a Q&A. We expect we'll have some time at the end. I'll be helping with some to lead a little bit of questions that you might have. So feel free to put those in as we go at any point into the Q&A. You can put them in anonymously or your name will be seen there. Either way is great. I'm going to pass it over to Ben here, who's going to get things started and introduce and do introductions.
Thanks so much, Emily. Glad to be here. My name is Ben Neely. I am the Chief Academic Innovation Officer at Revolution Prep. We're a national educational services firm, and in my current role, I'm very, very fortunate to be able to mostly just learn a lot of interesting things and then synthesize them and share them. And I think this intersection of AI tools and the college admissions landscape has become of particular interest to me in the last 18 months or so. I'm going to hand it over to my co-panelist, Chris.
Hi, everyone. Chris Rodriguez. I'm the Associate Director of College Counseling at the Lovett School in Atlanta. I'm very happy to be here with you today. I think this is actually going to be about the third time that Coral and I have presented this material. So that being said, please forgive us any missteps along the way. I'm sure they will happen, but we'll have a good time.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Coral Azarian. I am the co-director of college counseling out at Roland Hall in Salt Lake City, Utah. And yeah, Chris and I are taking the show on the road throughout the course of the year. So it's always really fun to be able to see folks kind of periodically, even if virtually, over the course of the year. So thanks for giving us the opportunity to kind of get the team back together. And we're really excited to share this information with you guys today. So.
Awesome. And then I will note we had a fourth member of our merry band when we were in Columbus at NACAC, and that is Ben Toll, who's the Dean of Undergraduate Admissions at the George Washington University. I don't think they emphasize the like Ohio State, but officially that's the name. Ben poor guy, is at a conference in Spain. I'm sure it's very, very important, but I'm sure he's sipping Rioja as we speak. No, I'm just kidding. But I'm going to do my very best to provide a weak facsimile of Ben as we talk about some of the components around the college side of AI in this material. So without further ado, let me go ahead and jump into the material here. Because it's a reprise, I decided to leave all of the NACAC branding on the slide, so it feels like you were there. We were joking before we started. When we were in Columbus, it was the biggest room, at least for me, the biggest room I've ever presented in, like a massive, massive hall. And the way they had us sitting, we could not see the screens or our slides. So as much as Zoom might feel very different than that room, the big upside is that we can actually see what we're doing today, which is really, really excellent. Three main things today. We're going to start talking on the college side. So I want to explore a little bit of use of AI in admissions. We have limited data and information, but we do have some signals there. So talk through that. I then have a couple of discussion questions that I'd love to have Chris and Coral dig into. Similarly, we'll then look at the high school side and talk about some of those considerations. And then finally, we will actually share with you the toolkit and some of the pieces that we have in that toolkit, the guides, where they came from, why they might be important, and then we'll answer any of your questions. So first things first, let's talk about that college side of things. And for each of these sides, I don't want to make it a duality or a dichotomy, but for each side, I think there is a pretty clear set of problems that AI tools have filled the void for or have started to address. And on the admissions or EM side, and this doesn't apply to all institutions in the United States, but for a lot of them, the last 15 years has been a challenging span broadly around declines in enrollment, in some cases, really disruptions to yield, budget crises and cuts, as in some cases the larger administrative overhead of these schools has become really sort of large. And so when you present those sorts of leaders with a set of tools that can potentially reduce costs and do a lot of the same work in EM or admissions, it's no surprise that AI has really seen a rapid uptick. And so the most recent figure we have is that 2/3 of US colleges are using AI use in some fashion in enrollment management and marketing. For those of us that were at NACAC, I went through the exhibit hall, and I forget the number, but I believe it was something like 70 plus of the vendors that I counted out of about 170 vendors that are offering some kind of AI tool or AI-powered tool that is specifically targeted at admissions leaders and enrollment management leaders. So this is a huge growth area, and really a lot of it is around the specific EM or marketing function for these colleges. And you can see why. If you look at all the pieces of the enrollment funnel, from recruiting potential applicants to handling those applications to trying to get them to yield and matriculate to your institution, there's a lot of different areas you can see in this sort of left column where AI applications can help a lot. And I don't endorse any of these tools, but this is an example of all of the different tools. I would suspect for each of these categories, there are 3 times as many tools as I am listing here that are actively pursuing and trying to sell into colleges and universities. One of the big things that I think we can observe around AI use in higher ed right now is that it is not cohesive. This is from the same, by the way, I didn't cite the survey here. This is the EDUCAUSE AI landscape study. They had 736 unique institutions respond, which is obviously a very large sample. And they found that only 1 in 5 of them had a cohesive institution-wide approach, meaning not only thinking about enrollment management as a silo or how the admissions part of that is done, but also the faculty and also the student services and everything else that goes into graduate programs, everything else at the school. So I think this will be an area to watch pretty closely, where I would hope and expect we will see this number increase. Until then, I think it'll be a very volatile space, because if you have separate silos in a big college, there's a lot of room for things to change rapidly as the left hand is not talking to the right hand. I have some data from surveying. I do surveys every year of students and counselors, and I ask a bunch of questions, a couple that pertain to the higher ed side. This is from not quite a year ago, January, February of 2025, using a Likert-like scale. So you'll notice this doesn't add up to 100. We're missing the neither agree nor disagree. But about 40% of current seniors as of last year, are worried that AI is being used to evaluate. I think this is a sort of a common theme when we ask students about AI in admissions. They fear that they're being evaluated and chosen or not chosen for admissions by algorithms. And I think that really, really bugs them. I'd say counselors, for the most part, those who have an opinion, believe AI is being used ethically, but the big missing middle here, right? I think we're looking at a majority of respondents who chose that neither agree nor disagree around this. I do think there's a lot of school by school uncertainty, right? Where we've had so few examples of colleges coming out and transparently sharing, here's what we're doing and why and how, that it's really easy in the absence of those specifics to worry and to doubt and to think of what are they actually using it for. A couple specific examples we do have, and both of these really became widespread last spring, summer, leading into NACAC. One is Virginia Tech, and I really was pleased with not only obviously what they're doing, but how they communicated it. It was really, really clear. They were facing a doubling in application volume in 5 years, going from 2019 to 2024, which in the greater context of budget constraints, you can imagine they are not able to double the amount of money they're putting into reading. And so they worked with their own faculty researchers to put together a co-reader that is AI powered, and to go from 2 human readers per student produce writing to 1 human, 1 AI. And then to use a 12-point scale. And by the way, this is nearly identical to how College Board did their SAT essay scoring back when they had an essay for many, many years. And this is before we used the term AI, right? And so these are effectively souped up versions of that same thing. And to my understanding, that 2-point discrepancy is very rare. I talked to someone who said they believe it to be in the single digits, if not low single digit percentages, that it's a really, really rare thing. And I think, allows them to hopefully maintain the same level of consistency and accuracy in evaluation. And again, just really appreciate how transparent they explained why, what they're doing. Didn't quite get to the point of sharing the exact data, but I think that's the kind of thing that breeds comfort with the use of AI when there is that transparency. Second example is maybe a little bit more mixed. In early 2025, the University of North Carolina student newspaper did some digging, and it was one of those situations where at a lot of public flagship universities there are transparency laws in place where, as a matriculated student who is enrolled at the university, you can go back to admissions and say, hey, I need you to give me my full application file and show me what that review process looked like. And from doing that, a recent admit found that there was some algorithmic scoring being used that had not been disclosed and had not been talked about. And clearly this was a student, I think, who was like a junior, and said, hey, you've been doing this since at least 2021, 2022. In response to this really excellent student journalism, by the way, kind of a bastion of hope in today's greater landscape, in my opinion, it's really excellent. They came out and gave this statement. And the thing, I suspect that the intention and the methods may be just as pure and defensible as what Virginia Tech is doing, but I think this is an example of where communication really matters, and the words you use and how you send them really matters. So one of the parts that I've bolded here is that they're getting data points about writing style and grammar. And I work a lot with teenagers, and I talk a lot with their teachers, their English teachers, their counselors. I think the message that UNC is trying to send is very different than what a 17-year-old is going to hear. There is a lot of self-doubt and imposter syndrome amongst college applicants. They're always worried that their writing isn't perfect enough or good enough. And so when they see writing style being analyzed by an AI and grammar being analyzed by an AI, I think their response is going to be potentially to use or even overuse AI tools to try and improve that aspect of their writing. And as the student journalism article showed, it had this amazing piece of art. I'm not using this with credit, but I hope it's okay. But the student who wrote this piece also made this wonderful piece, which was, their point was, hey, there's a really clear statement from UNC saying don't use AI in the things you send in, but yet it is okay for the admissions review to sort of secretly, before that point, be using AI to review the things that the humans will write. And this author cast that as a paradox. I happen to disagree. I think it's fair to say that we need more transparency and that we need clear policies that are practical around AI. I agree with all of that, but I don't think it's apples to apples. I think, when you look at each individual student telling their story and putting that on the page as opposed to a flagship public university handling 60,000 of them, I think the idea of using AI or algorithmic tools on one side and not the other is actually reasonable and rational. But I understand the emotion and the sentiment behind it. I think a lot of that is caused by a lack of transparency. So a couple questions for Chris and Coral. So on that exact same point, when we have admissions offices that are using AI or EM departments using AI, what does that minimum transparency look like? And the other question is, when admissions offices are thinking about an AI use policy for college applicants, how should they put themselves in the minds of 17-year-olds that might be applying to their schools?
I think, Ben, the transparency point is the biggest part of it for me, I think, and not just, I think, clarity of language, but also widespread clarity in terms of where it's being pushed or published, noted on the Common App if you're going to use it, noted on your website, everywhere where a student could possibly be accessing information or the application itself. This is what our policy is. I think beyond that, though, I think providing clear examples of, if you're saying it's going to be used for writing, for instance, give an example of how certain pieces would be graded. Say, this is, if you're doing a 1 through 5 scale, this is a 1, this is a 3, this is a 5, and also maybe kind of a breakdown of each of those gradings of this is why this is a 1, this is why this is 3, this is why this is a 5. I'm someone who likes examples anyway, and I'm sure there are a lot of students that are out there that are in that same position. Because otherwise, if it's just saying something as vague as UNC's policy of, oh, it's going to be grading grammar and spelling, or grammar and writing style. I mean, like, I care more about grammar than anyone. I mean, like, but I also recognize there's no kind of universal standard of the English language, regionally, socioeconomically, like anything. And so I think getting away from just this idea that there is an objective standard of how things will be graded, but kind of showing these are the reasons why we're going to be grading certain writing certain ways. I think that's probably the biggest thing they can be doing.
I would agree with Chris, and I think that so much of what we do on a daily basis when we're working with high school students, right? Like, we're getting to know them, we're getting to see kind of the anxieties in this process and the anxiety that this process breeds, not only with their parents, but specifically with them. And I think one of the challenges when you have policies that are incredibly vague is that, um, as we saw with test optional, right? Like, yes, okay, it's great you have the ability to choose, but there's so much hyper focus on these one kind of small, minute aspects of the process, which we all know as professionals. A decision does not come down to whether or not you used a comma or a semicolon here. That is not going to ultimately be the decision, kind of like deciding factor on whether or not you're admitted to UNC, but in their minds, that is a deciding factor, right? And so there's always this kind of like intense anxiety that gets kind of brought to the surface the more vague that you are. So I think that, kind of as Chris was saying, giving examples, talking about like their students are so used to seeing rubrics. They're so used to kind of being in classrooms where faculty are saying, this is what we need, this is what we expect, this is how you kind of on this specific assignment kind of get a 100 or get a 90 or get an 80. Giving students the opportunity to kind of glean a little bit more in depth. What is it that this specific institution is looking for? And how do I tailor my writing and what I'm producing in my application so that I can speak to this specific institution? I think, yes, it kind of creates a little bit more work and a little bit more kind of that they need to do on their end as far as research and more information. But in this situation, I do think more information is better, right? I think the UCs are really clear on what they want, what they don't want, how they want their PIQs to be structured, what they don't want their PIQs to be. And while it's not the most exciting writing in the world, it is very kind of perfunctory, and the students can kind of go in and do exactly what they need to do and know exactly what they're expected to do in order to succeed in that process. When it's super vague and it's writing style and like, who's grammar? What do you mean by that? Right? Like, I've got students that want to do something funky with the style of their essay. Is that going to work, or is that going to backfire on them? Just having none of that can be really, really tricky for them. So
I think the one other point that just I agree completely with what Coral was saying, but I think the one other thing that came to mind as she was speaking and thinking about if colleges are going to use this to grade essays, one of the things that came about when the SAT was using writing and was using these kind of automatic grading was that at some point, like everything, it got hacked. It got gamified, where it's like it was toward the end of its life cycle shown that like if you write in this very robotic style, you were getting maximum scores as opposed to students who are producing these beautiful essays and getting, kind of middling scores. And so making sure that that is not going to happen again, but really if you are going to use it for essay writing, recognize that there's a lot of different styles of writing, a lot of ways, to Coral's point, to really show I'm an excellent writer. It just may not be in this one specific model that you're using for it.
You're bringing back a real I hadn't thought about that in so many years because I was obviously working for another company not too dissimilar from Revolution Prep back then, and yeah, I remember that came out, and the other thing was length of essay. That like it was less about quality; it was like you need to fill it up, and the auto grader gives you more points. So I'm really glad you raised that piece of it, which is how do you defend against over standardization to try to fit a model that basically gives you the high scores in an admissions process. Let's move to the high school side of things, integrating AI into college counseling. On the problem space, on this side, in my view, there's obviously lots of different problems that AI could be solving, but the one that jumps out to me is the continued march towards, from a math people in the room, as the N approaches infinity in terms of how many colleges each student will be applying to in the future. In just a decade, we've gone from a quarter of high school students to half that are applying to 7 or more colleges. And I think that almost undersells it in a lot of schools, especially those that have a sort of more robust or striving college-going culture. This was anonymously furnished to me from a school that I work with, a large private independent school. This is the histogram of their application volume for last year's seniors. The median was around 18 or 19, and a full third of students applied to 23 or more, or 22 or more colleges and universities. So at the same time, demands on students around rigor and everything else have not decreased, and we're just saying, hey, keep up with the arms race. I mean, I know no one here who works college is saying this, but what students are hearing and feeling is, I have to keep up with the Joneses, right? Like in this arms race, I need to escalate the size of my list in order to shoot my shot and play my bingo cards, right? Again, I'm not saying I agree with any of that, but I think that's a lot of what is actually happening. And I think the other context for how today's 17 and 18-year-olds approach problems, it's very easy for me, as both a professional and a parent. I have a 18-year-old and a 12-year-old. It's very easy to be judgy. And, back in my day, we did this and we thought about problems this way and we were more resilient and whatever the, yeah, sure, Dad, was. But I do think there is a valid exploration of the context in which today's college applicants have been raised, and how their viewpoints on problem solving have been inculcated, right? We have a whole group of folks who doesn't need to even go to a restaurant, right, to get food to them. They have a way to do that that doesn't involve talking to a human or even making eye contact, right? And that immediately becomes very, very popular. They are bored. Well, they don't have to solve that boredom problem through any kind of creativity. They can just tap in their dopamine pathway into TikTok or Instagram Reels or YouTube Shorts and literally enter into a time machine in which 2 hours of boredom just passes, right? And if they are lonely, they don't have to necessarily be brave and make new friends and put themselves out there and be vulnerable. They can turn to AI companion websites like Character AI. And so I just say this so that we can be a little bit understanding and sympathetic of the landscape in which their brains are being nurtured, for better or for worse, probably mostly worse, but that's my cranky old guy approach, that they are used to when there's a problem. This idea of resilience and perseverance broadly has not been necessary given these digital tools that have been placed in front of them. And so as a result, when you are faced with a problem, and students could theoretically tap into reserves of patience and perseverance and be flexible in their approach, they're almost always taking the quick way. And I know this is a broad generalization. They're not all doing it all the time, but as a trend, it seems fairly evident to me that we're seeing that as a shift. I know any of my educators in the room that spend time with teenagers, especially over 10, 15, 20 years, I feel like unanimously agree that they've seen this shift happen in some degree. From a survey standpoint, when I asked those same seniors last year, have you used AI for college admissions? I also had some similar questions the previous Q1 of 24, going from a third to about 42% last year, and a significant increase in research and general advice, which I think coincides with the rise of reasoning models with AI, where they're able to actually get some more fact-based information as opposed to just a large language model, putting sentences together. For a while, I was under the belief that this middle outcome, that students have barely budged on using AI for writing and editing, I thought this was shy voter syndrome, that you had a lot of teenagers that were embarrassed to admit it. I've actually come around. My hunch here is that it is more so paranoia about AI detection, and that there is this feeling of like, if in any way AI is on the same computer as this essay I'm writing, I will be flagged and I'll never know. I'll just get rejected and they won't even tell me that, but it's because I used AI for anything. So I'm actually more inclined to believe this as a true result. But I'm going to do this survey again in about 2 months, and I'll get back to you and let you all know at a future session. Counselor engagement with AI tools, and this was from more like April, May of last year. We were at a place then, and I think every 6 months this is changing, but 6 months ago, we had about 50% of my respondents. I had about 100 college counselors respond. This was solicited via the Facebook College Admissions Counselors Group. So make of that what you will in terms of the types of schools or college counselors. I think like a lot of the ACACs, it will be shaded towards private, independent, parochial school counseling. But half of them were using these AI tools weekly or daily. And I didn't ask this question the year before, but anecdotally, I think it would have been a much smaller number then. And they're using, counselors are using this for a lot of different things. These were the things that bubbled to the top. Again, research, list building, I think that's a perfectly good and just reason to use AI tools when there's 2,400 undergraduate institutions and a student comes to you and says, I want this weather and this cuisine and this size of school, and they have to have, aerospace engineering with this specialty. You can't know that, right? But a tool that could quickly combine and search that correctly would be really, really powerful. So, some questions for Chris and Coral. What kind of practice in your counseling office can get students towards allowed and what I would say is like contributory and positive use of AI as opposed to taking human thought and outsource? I think a lot about of certain uses of AI as being outsourcing human thought, and that is not a positive comment on my part. So how do you sort of flow through your college counseling process to try to steer them that way? I've got a question here about protecting all students, being very thoughtful and equitable about multilingual students, first-gen neurodivergent students, knowing that there is implicit bias in AI detection tools and that there is going to be uneven policy enforcement. So how do you help cover for that? And then I think everybody here, if you're part of AICA and you're in this webinar, you are likely AI positive in a good way. And I know not all educators are as open to that. And so when you think about the counseling office as its own thing in a school, how do you navigate the cases where the English department or the history teacher or the admissions person at your high school or whatever it is isn't on the same page with your openness around AI?
You going to start this one off?
Sure. So kind of two things. I will both echo. I think I have also come around similar to Ben on, I think students are paranoid around using AI when it comes to drafting and writing. We are seeing the same thing with our students. Like kind of surprisingly, we're like students are really anti using it in any way with their writing. And we're having to do a lot of coaching and a lot of kind of reassuring on kind of how to use AI as a thought partner, how to use it as a brainstorming tool. And we're seeing a lot of resistance there. But I have students who have written complete drafts of their stuff and they're eliminating all their M dashes because they are terrified that it is going to be detected as potentially written or drafted by AI. So just to kind of like echo that sentiment, at least that's what we're seeing too. But I want to kind of speak to the third piece. I had an interaction with a colleague of mine. We have some kind of smaller professional development groups that have been kind of created at our institution, at our school, that are cross-divisional. So it's members of the faculty who are, beginning school, working with our youngest little learners all the way up through the high school. And I was working with one of our academic support counselors who's been pretty resistant on utilizing AI in their work and really kind of worried a lot about data, a lot about privacy in the work that they're doing. And I was able to kind of work with her and show her, and something that we've been doing a lot with our students too, is creating closed GPTs. And so within chat, that's kind of where I live. That's my wheelhouse. When it comes to AI, I tend to be a very loyal brand customer in all aspects of my life, but specifically when it comes to technology, once I learn it and I know it, I don't stray. So within chat, kind of creating these individual GPTs where I am assigning in an identity. I am the one providing all of the information, all of the data, all of the information that it is pulling from, and then only allowing it to pull from that. And I think that just kind of that knowledge. I didn't know that this existed until we collaborated with our computer science, the chair of our computer science department. And he walked us through, myself and my two colleagues in the college counseling office. He walked us through how to do this. And then that just kind of opened up a whole new world, both in the work that I've been doing with my students, but also in my ability to collaborate and kind of reassure some very AI cautious colleagues who are not as excited about the technology and are very wary and hesitant to use it. Kind of just gave them a little bit more reassurance. And I think it's been really interesting because she's actually beginning to use it with a student for whom English is their second language, and they are really struggling with writing. And being able to get their thoughts kind of, they're incredibly bright, but they cannot write for their English classes in a way that that is being communicated. And so she's kind of working with this student specifically on some kind of, personal create their own chat that then is going to grow with them. And so I just thought it was just kind of, those were some interesting questions, and I've just been seeing it in the last few weeks, even at Roll and Tall. So
I guess just as an extension of one of the things I said in my last answer, I think it's always important to provide acceptable examples of AI usage for students. I think otherwise they're not going to have any kind of guardrails or any sense of what they can or can't do. And so if students are maybe hesitant to use it, to, the surveys, this what 16 or 17% that are saying they're not using it for essays or something. I'm going to talk in a second, obviously, my part of the presentation about ways that you can use it, but I think giving them, being proactive and giving them examples of actually you can use it for essays, not to generate the whole draft, but in these small pieces. One of the things that we have talked about and we've kind of started doing a little bit here at Lovett is kind of AI literacy workshops. And so it's something that we introduced this past summer. We, for the first time, had writing workshops for the rising seniors and covered a lot of things in there. Mostly it was just a space for them to be able to kind of write, because that's a lot of the feedback we were getting, is that they were not being given otherwise a lot of chances to just work on essays. One of the things that I introduced in that was a session specifically on AI usage, and here are some ways to outline, brainstorm, et cetera. But I think honestly, you could have an entire workshop just centered around AI usage in every part of the process. I mean, I think we've tried to kind of sprinkle it into various parts of that application workshop where, one of the ways they can definitely use it that I think is completely morally acceptable, that is also really using AI as an efficiency tool, is with the activities list, where if you have a student who already has a resume, or if you have a student just write out all of the responsibilities for their 10 different activities or however many they have, not worrying about the 150 character limit, and then just a very simple prompt in ChatGPT can just say, like, give me a 150 character version of this that focuses on the action verbs, that doesn't use complete sentences, that separates clauses with semicolons, whatever. It gives you exactly what you want. And all it's doing is it's kind of transforming something that a student has written elsewhere and putting it in the format that they need. And so again, give me an example of, like, oh, actually you can use AI and here's a good way to use it. To the point of the second question about, protecting multilingual students or neurodivergent students, I think this is something where I think it, as much as is in conversations that we have with admissions offices at conferences or in person or whatever, making sure that detection is not is that really is just kind of equaling a flag and not an outright verdict on the student. It's not a kind of binary, either like, you cheated and your file is gone, or we're not going to do anything. I think using plain, straightforward language that's unambiguous is great. And also that there's going to be kind of gradations of enforcement where it doesn't just kind of jump immediately to the most severe for everything. And I think the danger, I think, of using AI for any of this is that if you're automating something, there's always going to be false detection that comes up. And Ben, I know you've had experience with that, and I think it's just one of those things where there should always be a very simple, straightforward way for students to challenge that and provide evidence of, here's the work that I did. And that's something I'll touch on in my slide in a little bit, but I think there should always be a measure, a very clear way for students to be able to kind of say, no, I didn't cheat, I didn't break any rules, whether they're, English as a second language, whether they're neurodivergent, or whether they're just a student who was falsely detected.
Thank you both. let's get to the toolkit. I always feel like we have what I think is a lot of really interesting stuff to share, and I always put myself in the shoes of an attendee, and I'm like, the title of the session said AI toolkit, and we're 34 minutes in. Where is the toolkit? Give me the money, Lebowski. So let's go right into it. And I'll start by shocking you with an AI generated image. And I told you Ben Toll is not here. Well, we have we have AI Ben Toll. That's who we have present with us on this slide. So had a lot of fun at various regional sessions, putting in headshots. In this case, it decided that Coral was not dressing up for the conference, whereas the rest of us were. And actually, even beyond this, this was ChatGPT's built-in image creation tool, which for this application is actually pretty good. Obviously, every one of us would look and be like, that's not me. It definitely thinks that I am heavier than I am in real life, I swear. But it's a lot better when you compare it to, for example, this was Gemini's Nano Banana, which if you look at, and by the way, I have the prompt that I used to generate these right here. I upload the headshots and then I told them this, photorealistic, composite image, yada, yada. This one, if you look at the faces, right, my face is actually super accurate. It's almost like they photoshopped exactly my face onto, or just use me. But then for Coral, Ben, and Chris, these are just different people. Like, this is not even actually remotely close to what they look like. And actually, if you start looking closely at some of the, like, eyes between Chris and Ben, it's like the same eye and the same nose. So yeah, your mileage will definitely vary when it comes to image creation. So I'm going to speak on behalf of Ben for his toolkit piece. He wrote what I think is a really thoughtful guide. His experience as somebody that does not have a background in technology or in AI as an expert, but who sits as dean of dean of admissions for a well-known undergraduate institution, is that starting around a year and a half ago, he was being approached by literally dozens of different vendors saying, hey, we have a miracle cure for the problems that might be ailing you in terms of budget, in terms of time. We know your application volume has increased. And what he found himself realizing is that, gosh, I'm not even equipped at this moment, this was a year and a half ago, to even know what questions to ask, right? I think the way Ben described it was, you don't know what you don't know, and then you're trying to make critical decisions about things. So he spent a lot of time sitting with his trusted faculty members at George Washington, learning about the technology, how it works, the potential upsides, the risks. He would have them sit in on these early calls. And through that process, he really developed, I think, a pretty solid framework for being able to know what questions to ask. That still preserves the reality, which is that every single institution is going to have their own unique set of constraints, their own unique set of priorities, their own unique set of methodologies, right? And so, I think especially early on, he would get a demo, and in the moment, it was that we've all experienced it with AI, that moment of almost like, this is magic, like this can't be real, this is amazing what it's doing, and being able to kind of snap out of that and stay grounded and be able to say, okay, this looks interesting, but let me understand how your model works. Would you be taking our student data and using it to train and improve your model, or is that kept separate? How long do you hang on to data? Do you destroy that data? How do you handle situations where there are unexpected outcomes? One of the things he really learned was that there was a key difference between a company that had a static demo, here's some slides showing you how this is going to work, versus those that were comfortable doing a live demo, where he could even ask questions and say, hey, rerun it if we want to do transcript evaluation this way or that way. And ultimately, those firms that were willing and able to do that in real time were more likely to be good partners for the sort of exploratory work that is needed in enrollment management and admissions in 2025, right? Like we're constantly broaching new frontiers. So in this toolkit, we're going to link you to the toolkit in about 10 slides. You will find Ben's guide. It's a PDF. You can check it out. Hopefully you find it really useful, especially if you work in enrollment management and or admissions. I'm going to turn it over to Chris, who I believe is going to speak on the next couple toolkit pieces.
Absolutely. Thank you. So one of the things I always feel the need to add a kind of a huge disclaimer on every time I present on AI is that I am kind of uncomfortable with the ethical implications of using it, particularly the resources AI usage consumes. And Ben has actually made me feel a bit better about the user side of this, kind of as opposed to the development testing sides. But still, it's always something I feel like I need to kind of throw out there. And as far as, kind of using AI for essay planning, it's obviously kind of a tricky subject, hence the touching the third rail thing there. It's and I think that kind of partially explains why students are so hesitant when it comes to either using it, period, or at least admitting that they're using it. But as I kind of referenced before, there are ways to help students in the essay preparation process using these LLMs, whether it's Chat, Claude, whatever. One of the ways is essay brainstorming. And this could theoretically be used for any type of essay brainstorming, but where I found it to be most helpful is for prompts where the information, where kind of specific information for schools is needed, and where the LLMs kind of almost act as a search function. And so one of the prompts that I always kind of use when working with students for this, we have a lot of students here, probably unsurprisingly, that apply to Georgia Tech, and Georgia Tech has had the exact same prompt for years, which is essentially why do you want to study this major and why do you want to study this major at Georgia Tech? And so if you were brainstorming for this and you were thinking like, I don't have as many reasons why, or I don't know how I can kind of connect what I want to do with what Georgia Tech offers, your prompt could be something like, give me 3 reasons why a student interested in an industrial design would choose to study at Georgia Tech, include references to research centers, relevant coursework, career connections / preparation, and anything else that would align with an undergraduate major in industrial design. So this then becomes kind of a jumping off point for the student in their own version of that essay. They're not copying and pasting it, but they're using it as that jumping off point. With outlining, this is really kind of best for students who have some amazing ideas, but maybe don't have a great sense of how to fit those ideas together. It can also kind of spur additional ideas for how to use specific literary techniques, like, starting off with in media res as a hook. So a sample prompt for this would be something like, I'm a high school student writing a college admissions essay, and I'm having difficulty with determining the structure of the essay. Please give me 3 to 5 suggestions on how to build these ideas into a compelling story that reveals that I'm someone who is kind, responsible, and creative. The ideas I have so far are insert ideas. So this kind of still leaves the writing of the essay in the student's hands, but it gives them a bit more of a roadmap to follow in doing that. Essay surgery is pretty open-ended. This is really, if a student has an essay they've already written and it just needs to be shortened, like from 300 words to 250 words for essentially the same prompt, that would be probably the easiest use. But if it's an essay that actually needs to be lengthened, the student can just ask the AI for ideas on how to fill in the remaining space. And that might, again, be that kind of jumping off point for where to go with the rest of it. The last one for evaluating the existing essay is this is kind of for essays that are either already complete or at least the student believes it's complete. So sometimes they may kind of be maybe kind of missing the forest for the trees and may just need someone to tell them this isn't doing what you think it's doing. So a sample prompt for this would be something like, I'm a high school senior writing a college admissions essay. I would like to ensure that the readers of my essay are learning the right things about who I am as a person. Please read the following essay and tell me 3 things that you have learned about the author of this essay. So, again, that should be telling them, if it's telling them what they think they want it to say, great, they're on the right path. You can also ask it to check the tone, just make sure it's kind of coming off the way they want it to. And as I'm sure many of you have experienced, sometimes students are not as kind of aware of how their writing may be received in its natural state, I guess we'll say. And so this could be kind of a check on like, oh, this is actually reading way different than what I was intending it to do. So again, there's a lot of other ways that you can use it in planning or helping with essay writing, but I think these are some of the ways that we've had some success with that I've encouraged students to use. And I guess just one kind of note, we've touched a little bit on plagiarism throughout this. And given that neither you nor your students can control what admissions offices are going to do or how they're going to handle suspected plagiarism, you need to help them protect themselves. So ways to do this would be always keeping records of the work that was done and when it was done, preferably in Google Docs. Draftback is a feature you can add to it. It's great. It actually shows kind of what was entered and when, and it will kind of type it back out for you. That's a very easy way to kind of show, here's the work I did. If they're copying and pasting something in there wholesale from somewhere else, that's not going to look great. But if it's showing them actually typing it in there, that really will help them. I'd also recommend keeping records of how any AI was used. So what prompts were entered, what was received, and how whatever output you received was integrated into the student writing. That way, it's very easy to present evidence for anyone questioning their work, whether it's an admissions office or even, a high school's administration that may be suspecting them of cheating, showing them, no, here's some screenshots, here are the prompts, here's what I received, and here's what the final version looked like. That way, it becomes very easy for students to defend themselves with that. And I think we're going to move on to visit itineraries, which is another way that you can kind of pretty effectively use AI. And I think we can go to the next slide. So obviously, as I'm sure many of you are, we're often asked to give suggestions for schools to visit during trips, or even to give kind of realistic itineraries for a series of visits during a trip. Like, we're going to be in Boston for a few days, and obviously we're going to hit Harvard and BC and BU and Wellesley and MIT if we have time, because those are all, clearly schools that the student will be admitted to eventually. But many of us are clearly capable of putting together these itineraries, but it can be a very time-consuming process. And we're also not travel agents. We don't know kind of the ins and outs of every single city, even if we've already lived in these places. So with as busy as we are, using AI as this efficiency tool for a task like this is something really worth considering. One of the things I like about it is that it can give as many or as few parameters or criteria as you need. So this is great where if you're needing to kind of quickly add or remove criteria, whether it's over the course of one meeting or over a longer period of time we're working with a family. It's something that's very easy to do. What I would recommend with this is kind of saving each student or each family's searches as their own conversation on chat. That way you can then return to that same search you've done before and update it as needed. Something I would recommend that you do is to remember to kind of account for things like travel times, meals, check-in times for info sessions. It's one of those weird logistical quirks of needing to kind of merge AI and reality. You're not creating this itinerary in a vacuum. So, as amazing as it would be to kind of beam directly from one campus to another, the reality is that in some places, in some situations, you may be facing some really long distances or significant traffic between campuses. So really try to think through what will add time to any trip, like even things like bathroom stops or refueling, and make sure you're adding those as instructions to your prompts. One kind of cool thing that I was discovering as I was, I think, working on the session that Coral and I did was you can also ask for follow-up ideas after an initial one. Like if you're seeing a gap between the end of one afternoon tour and dinner in the same city, you can ask for sightseeing options in that area. Like I think I used for Raleigh, it was like the tour ends at 3 and we're doing dinner at this place at 6. What are some interesting things to visit in Raleigh during those 3 hours? And we'll give you suggestions like this museum or whatever you're looking for. One thing to know is that it's not always going to produce perfect results on the first try. So like anything, make sure you're double checking that it's accurate information and all that. And you'll see in the toolkit that, it's going to present the output in an easy to read chart format if you wanted to, but just remember to ask for that when you're giving kind of specific presentations about if you wanted to appear in a certain way.
Okay, so this is me. For any of you that are kind of on the session today with us that are not the most kind of that are not the earliest adopters of new technology, know that you have a kindred spirit right here with you. I'm the type of person. Kristen Benham heard me say this before, but I literally am the type of person that will use their iPhone until it will not hold a charge anymore and only then go to Verizon to get a new version. So I am slow to adopt things, but I think one of the things that I have really kind of like taken advantage of when it comes to AI in this process alone is in the college search process and in using AI and chat specifically, again, that loyal brand partner, using it as a thought partner. And so much of us know that as we are about to kind of hopefully sooner rather than later turn the page on the seniors that we're working with and begin our kind of work and engagement with the class of 2027. For us, that happens in January. That starting is often the hardest part. And we often are meeting with our juniors and our junior families. And they kind of are sitting in two different spaces, right? They are incredibly eager to begin to get a list of colleges. Like they want the list handed to them in meeting one. But when you ask what it is that they're looking for out of their college experience, you are met with deer in headlights, right? They have no idea what it is as far as the characteristics and the qualities that they're looking for out of their own kind of college campus experience, but yet they want you to give them a list immediately. And so I think that this is where AI can kind of come into play, because students are really not as practiced as we would want them to be in the art of reflection and introspection. And that is something that takes time. And unfortunately, in this process, oftentimes we feel like we don't have enough of it. And so AI and chat can kind of not only help students as a super low barrier entry point, they are not having to engage in a conversation with an adult if they don't want to. It is them and an LLM sitting there across the screen. There is no judgment. There is nobody kind of, giving them a tone or a look or like a when they give us, kind of, I want a place that I can go to the beach every single day. And you're like, great, this is a very expensive 4-year vacation that your parents are now funding. But it is a really great opportunity for them to use their own vocabulary. And it also can kind of, bridge that privilege gap. And again, many folks that are probably either on this session or attended previous sessions might be kind of sitting in that, independent parochial school kind of landscape. But for any student at any high school, anywhere in the United States or globally, they all have access to free versions of these LLMs, and these LLMs are pulling, kind of this incredible amount of data and information. And so having a thought partner in this process that is free and easily accessible, even from their phones, really does kind of just even out that field a little bit more. It also, I think one of the things I have my students use chat in two very distinct ways when it comes to the list building process. One is from like the very, very, very beginning of having chat serve as an interview partner as they are walked through. They input a prompt with some very specific information about themselves. We allow them to kind of copy and paste and then put their own personal stuff in there. And then it serves as an interview and walks them through kind of 15 to 20 questions to begin to get an idea of what it is that they're looking for. And in that way, they're using their own vocabulary. They're using their own language. They're not having to understand what they mean by, kind of different search engine criteria that we often see, where students are like, what do they mean by this? What do they mean by, residential versus non-residential? What do they mean by baccalaureate? Like, they're just not familiar with that vocabulary. This allows them to use their own words. But it also gives them kind of at the end of this, when they're done with their interview process, it gives them really readable, short, quick, as we know, digestible pieces of information around kind of introductory college list where they can begin doing their own research. And we coach and teach them how to do that, but they can kind of take what it is that chat might give them at the outset, kind of for the output of these interviews. They can then go and use the links that chat will provide them with, because that is in the prompt, to go visit these colleges' actual websites and start engaging in virtual tours and virtual information sessions and utilizing some of their on-demand kind of library of, visit and marketing materials, so they can learn more about each individual institution. And they can kind of build that layered understanding of what it means, and then go back to chat, right? Like if they're learning about like, oh, actually, I thought that I wanted really, really big public institutions, but as I'm doing some of this research, I'm learning that I don't. And they can go back to that same interview and input new information and ask it to kind of reproduce a new list that is keeping some of the same criteria that they were initially, interested in, but adjusting it as they are learning more about themselves and what it is that's resonating with them. And then I also think that it can preserve efficiency, right? We are not made of infinite amounts of time. And so having a student go through an interview with an LLM and then kind of come to us at a meeting and say, hey, here's a list of 15 colleges that ChatGPT said might be good fits. What are your thoughts? Right? I'm able to look at the interview, ask it, kind of deeper questions or additional questions that I might be interested in given their responses. And I can look at that list and help shape it, and also provide additional suggestions that chat may not have thought of, that they may not have thought of, and kind of help them adjust the list accordingly. And so I think that what this does is, again, engage in a partnership where it is not Chat or Claude or Gemini doing all of the work for us. The student is engaging meaningfully from the outset. It is their thoughts, their desires, their wants and needs that is being put into this. Chat is kind of just helping to expedite the initial list building process. And then we're coming in kind of on the back end of it and saying, hey, here's our, years, decades of expertise around these colleges, around you, around your parent expectations, around all of these types of things. Here's some additional schools that I think might be good fits. And here are some that I actually think on this list that might not be, kind of necessarily great matches for you. So.
And then, thank you, Coral. Thank you, Chris. Piece that I wanted to talk about very, very briefly is, I think, as Coral mentioned, there's a really cool opportunity for students to use this as a foundational tool. On the counselor side, I alluded to this sort of idea earlier, this problem where you are, it's a puzzle. I think there are, what I gather, I'm not a high school counselor, but what I gather is that there are a number of students in situations where it's right down the middle. It's, the types of needs and constraints that you're very used to providing some ideas around when it comes to the list. But then you get that curveball kid where they're like, whoa, I want all of these sort of things, and you're not sure. There is a set of tools that are named Deep Research, different frontier models. Certainly ChatGPT, Gemini have their own deep research thing. So does Perplexity as another sort of third party. And it's basically a way, if you have access to it, a way to force the AI tool to spend a lot of time and computational resources to deeply puzzle over a question. And so in these scenarios where perhaps you are stuck with a student where you're like, wow, a lot of my go-tos don't make sense with this student, you would not use this, I would say, every day. The prompts and the process that I lay out in this guide, it'll end up taking you about 30 minutes to get the info in, and then anywhere between 30 to 45 minutes for the AI tool to come back. So it's much more like if you had a junior assistant researcher in the office where you could say, hey, go spend 30 hours researching every possible college fit. Instead of 30 hours, it's about an hour in total time between you and this tool. So won't go any further into it, but I would definitely recommend checking it out. When I have piloted this, I actually worked with a counselor in the Miami area, and we used her daughter as the example because she's a junior currently, and even she's a 20-year experienced college counselor, was pretty impressed with some of the ideas, suggestions, and factual accuracy and citations are a really key piece of these deep research tools, where it will show you exactly where it got the information from to help prevent against any hallucinations as you go forward. So anyway, this is the kind of output you get. Not only in this prompt do you get, here's some schools, but why is it a fit? Based on all this detailed information you gave me, here's some really specific reasons why UF would be the right fit for this student. And, what are the concerns? Given some of the student's needs or wants, here are the ways in which it may not work. Like, it's really thorough, as you can see. It's a very, very big difference than when you just start with talking to ChatGPT or Gemini and asking it some basic advice. It goes very, very deep and considers the context of the student in a much sort of more profound way than the entry-level use of the tools. One thing to note about these tools, they are, generally speaking, either not free, or if you have access to deep research tools, they are, you get like one a month or something like that. So I tell anybody who becomes an AI enthusiast or is using it to pay for the $20 a month plan on whatever platform they're using, whether that's Gemini or Claude or ChatGPT. In many cases, it gives you some data privacy tools, which are nice, and it just sort of opens up access to all of these different features. And I've not found anyone yet that is like, I didn't get my $19.99 worth for that first month. I think it's a pretty good investment, and you didn't hear it from me, but it's also pretty easy to share that login and password with any colleagues that you might share an office with, just saying. And we all do it with Netflix, so I think I'm allowed to say that about the AI tools as well. So here's the toolkit. Emily has thankfully also pasted the direct link into the chat. I know sometimes it can be hard to access a QR code when you're already on your computer, so that's the exact same link that you can see in the chat box as well. Would love to answer some questions. I know we've already answered a few that have come through the Q&A, and I know it is 10:59 Pacific, so I want to be respectful, but I imagine we can touch on a couple. One that came in for you, Coral, was you were talking about kind of bridging the gap with other colleagues at school, and you mentioned the creation of custom GPTs. And so this question was, can you share a little bit more about what you mean around establishing those different GPTs? What does that look like?
For sure. So for example, one of the ways that we're supporting students in kind of developing custom GPTs, and there's an option to kind of go in, and I could not give you step-by-step instructions right now. And it would take longer than the time is that we have. But one of the things that the academic counselor is going to be doing with this student is allowing the student to upload essays and writing assignments that they've already written, so that they're using their own writing as kind of the baseline for what this GPT is then going to be able to kind of support them in doing. And so, for instance, if we have a student who is really nervous about using it to help them kind of draft essays or that kind of thing, right? They might be uploading their own writing. Here are all of the essays that I've written. Here are different creative pieces, academic pieces, so that GPT understands their style, their vocabulary, their language use, their cadence, all of these things in their own writing, and saying, hey, this is a prompt that I'm using. Given my writing, how might you suggest, kind of using some of Chris's, ideas, how might you suggest that I outline this, my response to this essay prompt? Here's what I want to talk about. Here are my ideas. Here are my core values. Here are the anecdotes that I want incorporated. But I'm really struggling with how I could structure this essay so that it feels like me, is me, but also is a little bit more interesting than kind of just the perfunctory, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. And chat is only using what the student has already uploaded in order to give its response and its feedback. And so again, it's kind of this closed loop. It's almost like that closed circuit TV when you go into like Target, and it's super flattering. But it's that closed circuit loop, so that you're not worried that it's pulling from outside sources. It's all the student's own stuff and voice. And so that's kind of what we mean by the closed GPTs. And we've really started coaching students on this, utilizing it in our own work. And we have teachers using it, where students are allowed to use AI in their classrooms for specific assignments, but they are only allowed to use the kind of created GPT that the teacher has kind of put stuff into. How they're doing that, I'm not quite sure. I'd have to ask my AP computer science teacher. It's really been a tool that we've started to utilize much more frequently.
Only thing I'll add to that, I think that's all spot on. Another tool, if you're looking for sort of the closed system approach where I want just this information or documentation, I think one of Google's strongest AI tools is called Notebook LM. And it will allow you to take and really focus that large language model to just use the information that you gave it for the most part, as opposed to going to its broader training set, which is where you tend to have issues when you're trying to do that kind of work with just a set of students' essays. Or I'll use it for throwing in 6 or 7 journal articles in and asking for some synthesis and thematic analysis, knowing that it's just going to look at the stuff I gave it and not everything else that's in its mind as it goes. So I want to be respectful of time for both panelists and attendees. It is 11:02. Thank you so much, Chris and Coral. Thank you to AICA for hosting this reprise. I sincerely hope you found that all useful. I will also call your attention that Emily has put into the chat the next and final NACAC 2025 recap session coming up in December on the 9th, Responsible AI in Admission, Choosing, Testing, and Launching AI Tools. Strongly recommend. I'm going to be there to check it out, and strongly recommend you all join as well. I was not able to join that session when I was in NACAC, and so I missed it, even though I was there. So I'm really glad they're doing it. But yeah, thanks, guys.